Is there a chance they could trade Tom Wilson?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holman. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about some crazy stuff. This was something that I read about some crazy rumors out there in the hockey writers, and Dan Rosen talking about the possibility of trading Tom Wilson. It seems crazy to me, but is there a possibility that could happen? We'll talk about that in the show. Then we'll talk about TJ Oshie and how he is done for the rest of the year. What does that mean for his career with the Capitals going forward? And then to close out the show, we will talk about the Capitals taking down the Islanders. Yes, the Islanders, when they were missing quite a few different players, but just to get going here, this was an intriguing piece that I couldn't pass up. As you know, I've spoke of on the show that I revere Tom Wilson as one of the untouchables. And who are those untouchables? It's Alex Ovechkin, it's Tom Wilson, and it's John Carlson in my assessment. And in that order, I would say that Alex Ovechkin is the most important, Tom Wilson is the second, and John Carlson is the third. So you got to know that when I read this article and I heard from Dan Rosen, this was in the Hockey Writers, them talking about the fact, is there a possibility that Tom Wilson could get dealt out of DC? Now, what are some of the things that we know about Tom Wilson, as he only has 1 year left on his contract, and then he is a UFA? I don't even want to think about this team without him on the lineup. As you can tell, I'm quite a big fan. I have his jersey hanging right here. But, just to go over a lot of the different things about what he means to this team, in my assessment, the future captain of the Washington Capitals, there's no doubt about it. His leadership qualities, his ability to score goals, his intimidation factor. He is a unicorn, a four-leaf clover that doesn't really exist in the NHL anywhere else. Now, a lot of people would argue and say, he's kind of a Ryan Reeves type, and he is a Ryan Reeves type for sure, but he brings a lot more to the game. I mean, last year he was in the top 3 in goals. And the intimidation factor, you're not going to push around any of the Capitals players, or you're going to have to answer to him. If he's out there playing, if he's in the active lineup, he'll get a shift with you sooner or later and he'll settle the score. So you got to think that there is not one of the other 31 teams in the NHL that wouldn't love to have Tom Wilson on their team. And with that being said, he is going to get plenty of offers to join prospective teams out there. How loyal is Tom Wilson going to be to the Washington Capitals? I love him. I think he's one of the best, of course. I think that the fan base in general in DC loves him. But would Brian McClellan be willing to get crazy and move someone like a Tom Wilson if for some reason he doesn't perceive that he can sign him to a new contract? Listen, it was pretty crazy when they moved on from Dmitry Orlov and Garnet Hathaway. But what was the sticking point with Dmitry Orlov? This is what has been said. Orlov wanted 7 years. McClellan and the Capitals were all in on 3 years. What's going to happen if Tom Wilson and his representation, his agent, they say that they want a 7-year deal, and the Capitals are like, well, we're not going to go anything more than 4. Would the Caps be willing to part with Tom Wilson? If you are a Capitals fan, that should send fear through everyone that is listening or watching this podcast right now, because there is no one else like him out in the NHL. And if you think this team is deplorable right now, imagine it with Tom Wilson. out of the lineup. I mean, it's just a crazy, crazy thing for me to think of. And I know that this is just a guy that's trying to drum up a story, but it does, it gets the ball rolling in your head a little bit. Listen, it was my assessment that the Capitals should be willing to move on for most anyone, and for a lot of other people, their worlds were getting shook when I said Nick Backstrom or TJ Oshie. Could you imagine the Capitals without Backstrom or Oshie? So I understand the over the top. The hyperbole, perhaps, associated with moving on from Tom Wilson. But let's just talk about the story here a little bit. This was in the Hockey Writers, and it was more than just that. So this was what they said. Maybe Mantha gets traded. Maybe Wilson does. I don't think you can rule it out because his contract expires after next season. But the Capitals are not tearing it down, and it's hard to do an invasive surgery to the roster with the contracts they have signed. In the history, the greatest player in team history is embarking on. So it's not, it's a bit cryptic. It doesn't really, it's not spelled out real plain. It's just him kind of pontificating. It's him spitballing, throwing it to the wall and seeing if it sticks. I do respect his insider feel to the whole thing, but I hope, of course, that he's wrong. I don't ever want to picture this team anytime soon without Tom Wilson in this lineup. A huge piece, despite rumors that Evgeny Kuznetsov is unhappy and the Caps might explore the idea of a trade this offseason. Dan Rosen of NHL.com writes, "I think the Capitals would trade Kuznetsov if they can get good value in return for the 30-year-old forward, but that his low production means this isn't the best time to trade him." He adds, "Instead, my guess is Alex Ovechkin, John Carlson, Nick Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and TJ Oshie stay together at least for next season, and the Capitals continue to work around them to try to put together a playoff caliber team." Rosen suggests there will be changes, but they will be the outside and with depth pieces in an attempt to give this group one more shot. So listen to who Dan Rosen reveres as his untouchables. Alex Ovechkin, okay, he's on my list. John Carlson, Nick Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and TJ Oshie. And I know he doesn't, list them as his untouchables, but he said that is his guess, at least for next season, and that they'll try to build a team around that. Notice, based on what I said earlier there, that Tom Wilson is not a part of that equation. Does he know something that we don't know? I think, I trust Dan Rosen, of course. I think I trust Elliot Friedman a little bit more. I'm sorry, Dan Rosen. It's just the way that it is. If I heard Elliot Friedman talk about it, I think that the arrow in my head would go up. The warning flags would start to go up a little bit. Just being the fact that he is a premier NHL insider, Dan Rosen. I mean, he is from NHL.com. It's like some fly by night blog that's out there. It's a legitimate NHL.com. It's about as legitimate as it gets. And I know that it's their job to drum up ratings. And, the reason I'm bringing it up to you is because that has been my focus ever since the Capitals are out there, is how crazy are the Capitals willing to get this team competitive again. And it's been Dan Rosen's assessment that perhaps Tom Wilson they'd be willing to deal him out of DC because he has an expiring contract next year. I mean, for me, it just really gets the ball rolling in my head, and it kind of, gets things going up here. Like, is there the possibility? Has there already been conversations between Tom Wilson, representatives, his agent, and Brian McClellan? And has there already been, offers out there that have been shot down? This would be the first that we're hearing of it. But if that is the case, Caps fans, you should be concerned. I know it's not them moving Alex Ovechkin, but this is darn close to Alex Ovechkin, in my opinion. So let's really hope that there is no, excuse me, fire to that smoke, because if that is in fact true, that could be, some tough sledding, as they say up north here, for this Capitals team. So that would be tough. Let's really hope that that's just Dan Rosen just trying to, come up with material for, stuff to talk about. I mean, he's got a lot of material to come up with. So maybe that is just him kind of summarizing his thoughts on the Capitals. Let's really hope that's not the case, because if that is in fact the case, if there's any truth to that, I think this Caps team is going to be heading for some tough times out there. All right, so after the break here, we are going to talk about TJ Oshie and how he is out for the season. What does that mean? We'll talk about it straight ahead. Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Let's face it, this Nationals team is just kicking off. And what makes watching the games that much more exciting is if you have some money on the game, that's where FanDuel comes in. So don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this next segment here, we are going to talk about TJ Oshie sustaining yet another injury. What is one of the things that I've spoke of on this show is it seems like TJ Oshie over the years is getting injured more and more often. And that is ultimately why I put him as not one of the untouchables. Listen, I love TJ Oshie. I got a new appreciation for him when I saw him play live when they played against the Wild. And if there's a scoring opportunity, he's there. If there's, any big play being made, he's in the thick of it. But it's my belief that he is a bit, injury prone, for lack of a better word. He plays much bigger than he actually is. Now, don't get me wrong, TJ Oshie's no little small guy out there. He's still, built pretty well, but he tries to take on sometimes the biggest guys out there. And I know that oftentimes he's injured and it's not his fault. It's just being a victim of circumstance. It's a victim of playing in the NHL. It's the perils of playing in the NHL, right? But in any event, he is injured and he's going to miss the rest of the season. We do know that Alex Ovechkin also was out of the game tonight. Listen, for me, the Caps are out of it. Right now, they're trying to play spoiler, but at the end of the day, we do not. And so there's a couple schools of thought. So some of the schools of thought is Alex Ovechkin really injured? Is it in fact, or are they just kind of being precautionary, and saying he's kind of bruised up a little bit, and let's just let him coast off into the postseason. Let's get him healed up for next season. I don't know if that's the case, but you got to think that, do you want to risk injuring Alex Ovechkin on games that mean literally nothing other than spoiler? And that's really nothing. But the other school of thought, the other side of the coin there is that this is time squandered of him not chasing Wayne Gretzky. He's going to be up on it to pass and then surpass Wayne Gretzky because of injuries. We're starting to see him get injured more and more often. The Russian machine that never breaks is breaking down a little bit more often than he used to. And so it is a bit interesting, I think, to say. But getting this back to TJ Oshie and what he means and how the fact that he is out of the season. This piece was an ESPN. Caps forward TJ Oshie is finished for the season because of an upper body injury. Coach Peter Laviolette confirmed Monday that Oshie will miss this week's final 3 games. The Caps did not make the playoffs. Oshie, 36, last played March 30th. He finishes his 15th NHL campaign with 35 points, 19 goals, 16 assists in 58 games. Lavi said he was not sure whether Oshie's injury would require surgery. Oshie has 670 points, 290 goals, 380 assists, and 497 penalty minutes in 958 games with the St. Louis Blues 08-15 and the Capitals. So that's one of the things, and I hate to say it about it just because he gets injured so often, but we got to worry about this team proper. And what do I mean is it's not worrying so much about the players, but it's about the overall good. And I know people are going to say, well, you were just all up over yourself over Tom Wilson. I get that. The players, I'm not trying to diminish that the players aren't important. Don't get me wrong. But I would just say that, given the fact that TJ Oshie is on the wrong side of 30 and he gets injured quite often, I would say that, if the Caps could get a decent return on him, same goes for Backstrom. I think they should pursue those avenues. I want the Caps want to be competitive soon. We don't want to wander out into the wilderness like potentially the Washington Nationals will do. Um, just based on the fact and why I draw lines there is because they're going through a rebuild. Just think about all the changes that have taken place on that team. So I think that the Capitals want to be competitive and they should do what they have to do to be competitive. And if that means moving some bigger pieces, other than my three untouchables, of course, I think that they should be willing to do that. And yes, that includes the net minding. Of course, I would not want them to move on from Darcy Kemper. But I would be willing to listen to offers. If you bundle Darcy Kemper, and another player, what kind of return could you get? If I had to pick one, of course, I'd rather move Charlie Lindgren than Darcy Kemper. I'm not crazy. But again, and I don't want to just move Charlie Lindgren either. I want to listen to what the other offer would be, right? If you could get an upgrade, if you could bundle those players with another player to get a big return, maybe say that forward that you were looking for, that center that everyone keeps talking about that we need, or maybe that veteran defender out there. I mean, take a look at it, several seasons ago when Mac went out and picked up Niskanen and Orpik and the huge impact that made on this team. You saw them, they won a Stanley Cup. So, I mean, the evidence, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And I do think that ultimately it would be worth it if they can get a good return on it. TJ Oshie, again, I will always be, forever in his debt and gratitude towards him for what he did for this Capitals team and being instrumental and integral in them winning the Stanley Cup. But if this was his last season, I will have nothing but good memories of him playing on this team. Wish him nothing but the best on his perspective team. But that's just kind of my thing. And you're starting to see injuries come into focus. Same thing goes for Nick Backstrom. He had that major hip resurfacing procedure. I understand that he came back much sooner than anyone thought. But it's my kind of assessment and my viewing when I see Backstrom out there. I don't think he's playing 100%. Will he ever be able to play 100%? He's also on the wrong side of 30. So we hear all the time that this team needs to get younger. I think at some point that's going to be the case. And you're going to start to see ushering in of, different players and some young players. And I think this team is going to look, quite a bit different next season. How is that going to manifest itself? I guess it remains to be seen. All right. So after the break here, we are going to talk about the Capitals as they actually win a game. Can you believe it? And they do it without some of the biggest players in the lineup. We'll talk about that straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this next segment here, we are going to talk about the Caps as they actually take down the Islanders. Improbable is what I would say about their victory tonight. Not impossible. Obviously, they won the game, but when you take a look at who is missing from the lineup, you take a look at Ovi missing from the line, you take a look at Oshie, amongst other players that we'll talk about here, it was definitely not the outcome that I saw coming. And what was key, what was paramount to their win tonight? It was scoring. 63 seconds was all it took Monday for the Capitals to jump out to a multi-goal lead over the New York Islanders, writes Matt Wyrick in NBC Sports Washington. That is what I have spoke of on this podcast all year, is the Capitals getting behind, and then they're constantly trying to claw their way back into it. And oftentimes this past season, they weren't able to do it. So they got off to a good jump. They got on the board early, and it was too much for the Islanders. So this was one of the games that I spoke of where the Capitals were playing spoiler. They're trying to spoil, if you will, the New York Islanders' possibilities and what's going to happen with their playoff push. Where are they getting seated? They got a little bit of help tonight because the Maple Leafs took down the Panthers. I don't want to help out the Islanders. Don't get me wrong. I hope the Islanders lose. I hope the Penguins lose. They're bitter rivals at the end of the day. And yeah, I take it a little bit personal. I think you guys do too. You know what I'm talking about. But um, in any event, the Capitals did find a way to do it, and they did it, without some of their biggest players in the lineup. Winless in each of their last 6 games heading into the contest, the Caps were forced to dress just 17 skaters for the third straight game, with Alex Ovechkin, TJ Oshie, Anthony Mantha, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, and Nick Dowd All out due to injury, even without those names, they handled the Islanders by getting off to one of their best starts of the season. That's what they have needed to do this entire season. It's interesting. This game kind of reminded me a little bit of December Capitals hockey, where when they're up against it, when you take that orange and you just squeeze it, it's surprising how much juice you can get out of it. And they got a lot of juice out of this Capitals team without some of their marquee names in the lineup. You were without Oshie, you were out Alex Ovechkin, you were out Anthony Mantha, TVR, Nick Dowd, some huge names, and the Capitals were still able to rally and win this game. Not even rally. They got they were able to win. They got they were able to take it to the Islanders from the puck drop. From the instant the puck dropped, the Capitals really gave it to the Islanders, and they were able to overcome. Dylan Strome got the scoring started on the first shift of the game, finding some space in the right circle and scoring a wrister past New York goaltender Ilya Sorokin short side for his 22nd tally of the season. One of the things I'll say, and I've talked about a lot of different players, and I was kind of forced to make a decision of, in my mind, who are the players that are absolutely not touchable. One of the things I will say is Dylan Strome has proven his worth and then some many times over. He has come to this team and kind of lived way past anyone's expectation for him. He was ultimately brought here. He was discarded by the Blackhawks, but he was here to be a band-aid, a stopgap in Nick Backstrom's absence. And everyone was like, well, what are we going to do with him once Nick Backstrom comes back? He has still been integral to this Capital success, as was displayed tonight. So, I'm very happy that they have Dylan Strome, and I'm glad they have him under a new deal. And we need more players like Dylan Strome in this lineup to help this team going forward. One shift later, the Caps second line scored right after off the draw. Craig Smith found Rasmus Sandin along the glass, and the defenseman snuck the puck through a sliver of an opening to make it 2-0. Craig Smith, I'm not so sure what his future is with this team. I mean, he has not been horrible since he's been here. Is there a long term for Craig Smith on this team? I suppose anything's possible if they can get him under a good deal. Probably wouldn't be an avenue that I would pursue. It just seems like, kind of like what the Capitals have done, kind of status quo of, signing an older guy to a 1-2 year deal and, just a bunch of old clunkers going down the road. Again, for me, Craig Smith has done an admirable job. He has not come here and stunk the place up. He's actually done a pretty decent job since he's been here. Rasmus Sandin, another great acquisition. But ultimately, I'm glad they stepped up tonight, but going forward, I don't know what the future is for Craig Smith. According to NHL stats, Strome and Sandin combined for the 5th fastest 2 goals to start a game in franchise history, and the fastest since Ovi and Oshie did it in the 46 to open a game against the Canadiens on October 7th, 2017. So that's what it was all about. It was just the Caps being engaged and Darcy Kemper going out there and killing it, saving 38 of 40. Just really a good victory, a good morale boost. And I know that there's not a lot to play for anymore and that the end is coming soon, but still for the guys that are playing with pride for, the name on the front of their jersey, for pride for their team, pride for their city, pride for themselves, because they're in the NHL and they're helping contribute to the success. Good for them, good for the guys that stepped up, good for Strome and Sandin and Kemper and everyone else that was instrumental in winning the game tonight. And, I can say that even though these games don't mean anything, it's still good to get a win. And it's good to see, that this team still has some fight. There is a thing out there called Team Tank, and how some teams like the Blackhawks and the Blue Jackets and the Sharks and the Ducks are all kind of like, we didn't want to win. We wanted to lose the game because we're all in on the Connor Bedard sweepstakes and all the other players that are around him. That is the wrong attitude to have. And let's face it, NHL fans. Is Connor Bedard going to save the Columbus Blue Jackets? Johnny Gaudreau, Johnny Hockey could not save that team. And I understand that Connor Bedard is a bigger talent, ostensibly, than Johnny Hockey. But, these teams that are tanking on purpose, shame on them. And that's kind of showing their true character, if you will. And I know that that's just beat writers and stuff saying that the teams have never formally come out and said, we're trying to tank. But, good for the Capitals, even though these games mean nothing. They're going out there, they're fighting, they're dominating, and they're winning games. And I want them to win the rest of the games. I mean, let's face it here. There's only, just a handful of games left. Let's try to win them if we possibly can. Let's put away that silly notion of trying to tank to get better draft picks. If it happens, it happens. Great. But the idea that you're going to go out there and just mail it in seems absurd to me. Play with some pride. And I think that, and I know that the Capitals will do that, and they have a long history of doing that as well. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Locked On Game to Game NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, and I would love to chat with you guys some more outside of the show. Join me on Subtext. There's more information in the show notes. And also, whatever podcatcher you guys are using, if it's Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you will know when the new podcasts are available. And then if you could do me a favor when you're done there, this podcast is also available in video form. Hop on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button so we can get those subscribers up. And I have you guys to thank. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you next time.